Well, good morning, good afternoon, depending what time of day it is. Thank you very much to Ariel and the team for inviting me to talk today. I'm a neonatal pediatrician in the UK, and I've been asked to speak about human milk fortification from a European perspective. And just to start off by saying that all of us are conflicted and biased, even when we think we might not be. And usually it's nothing to do with money. I have received funding from industry and government sources, but like many others, I have a series of other potential conflicts depending on which organizations I work with, and of course, personal experiences in the area of human milk and preterm babies. And I just want to point out, we've got a fantastic neonatal nutrition network in the UK. It's been running for about 20 years now. You can find us online if you want to find out more. I've also helped establish a new neonatal nutrition network in Africa. And again, we've got an online course there. And then on the right of the screen here, you will see an online learning course that we developed as part of the SBGAN recommendations for enteral nutrition in preterm babies. And again, you can find that online or email me if you want further information. So I want to emphasize at the start that human milk fortification is a complex intervention. And nutrition includes more than just the nutrients. Of course, we tend to focus in on the macronutrients and micronutrients, but certainly in the last 10 or 20 years, we've become much more aware of the important role of bionutrients, particularly those appearing in breast milk, such as human milk oligosaccharides and growth factors, hormones. The microbial aspects of nutrition are, of course, very important, particularly for conditions such as NEC. And they be microbes that are promoted by components of breast milk or microbes acquired in breast milk or from the environment or even administered as probiotics. And then the last element of nutrition are the kind of socio-behavioral and technical aspects. I mean, how do we get the food into the babies? What about the sensory aspects of feeding? What about our own sets of beliefs and behaviors and commercial pressures that we may come across? So all of these are included in nutrition. And therefore, nutrition is very much more than simply nutrients. Breast milk is more than simply food, and Fortifier, when we're discussing it, is more than simply giving babies extra nutrients. And I created this as what you call a kind of logic model when I was thinking about the use of donor human milk. So it's not really tuned to fortification specifically, but it just gives you an idea of how I've been thinking about this area, particularly the context within which you might be using Fortifier, the different processes that might be involved in developing Fortifier research, the technical aspects. What are the outputs? You know, what is it we're measuring with all of our usage of Fortifier or human milk products? And then what are the actual kind of hard outcomes? I mean, what difference does it make to the babies? And what difference might it make for the health service itself? So when it comes to the European perspective, many of you realize that the politicians put us in a bit of a pickle a few years back, and for better or worse, we decided to go it alone. And so maybe a lot of what I'm going to say is a UK perspective rather than a truly European perspective. But what are the issues? I guess the issues are, if we use Fortify, do we use it routinely or do we individualize its use? When should we start using it? How do we monitor it? If babies are primarily receiving donor human milk, should we be fortifying the donor milk, or is it better just to switch to a preterm formula? How long should we continue the fortification for? Should we use Fortifier in the post-discharge period? And then the thorny issue of, should we be using a bovine or a human milk-derived fortifier? So in the UK, I think you'll find well over 90% of babies receive some mother's own milk in the first 2 weeks. And most tend to use donor human milk if there's a shortfall, but that's certainly not universal. Many of you, again, will see that mother-only milk rates decrease during the NICU stay. So in our unit, typically only about 50% of babies are breastfed at discharge, but there's clear variation across Europe. And then what is the truth about fortification in terms of what people are doing? What really happens in practice? Actually, we don't know that much. We know a bit more about what people say they do, but we rarely have the granularity to really understand which babies are being fortified. And of course, preterm babies are incredibly heterogeneous, but then certainly so are clinicians very heterogeneous. Should we do it routinely? As I say, there's limited evidence really published, but most in the UK seem to use Fortify routinely. If it's human milk that makes up the primary volume, but we don't all agree which baby should be fortified. Some of us would fortify routinely less than 1,500 grams. Others might only routinely fortify less than 30 weeks. You'll know that the Cochrane review on this, published a few years back now, only found 18 studies, all of which are pretty small, so less than 1,500 babies, and really difficult to draw any firm conclusions. Not surprisingly, weight and length gains a bit better, but no impact on necrotizing enterocolitis and almost no data about long-term developmental outcome. And so there is this initiative now to have this randomized trial being led by Nina Modi's group, and I'll come on to that again a bit later in the talk. When do we start? Again, limited data about what really happens. Most in the UK seem to wait until the babies are on full feeds, and I'm aware that's different from what you might see in North America. But we tend to start milk feeds a bit earlier than you and increase probably a bit faster. So probably we're using Fortifier at a similar postnatal age. Again, as I say, like just think about the concept of nutrition being more than nutrients. Fortification does slow gastric emptying, therefore you're going to have higher gastric residuals, and that may be interpreted incorrectly in my view, but that may be interpreted as the baby not tolerating milk in some way. So my own personal view is that because it's human milk bionutrients that really provide us with the key advantages for neck prevention and better outcomes, I actually prefer to increase human milk more quickly and then add the fortifier in later, rather than focus on attaining the nutrients, the nutrient requirements in that left top box. So if you have time, we can discuss that. What do we say to parents? To be honest, I'm not really quite sure. I mean, do we actually make it very clear that the fortifier we're using is of cow origin? Are we actually being a bit disingenuous by not spelling it out to parents, or are we just trying to make it simple for them? Do we actually give them any choice? Certainly not in most NHS hospitals. We don't have the money to buy human milk derived fortifier. And I'm not really quite sure what parent information sheets might be saying. What about monitoring? Well, most NICUs in the UK do not have full-time dietitians. What seems to happen is most use Fortify routinely and monitor weight and biochemistry every 1 or 2 weeks. I think you'll find that length measurements only done in a minority of units. No units routinely using the infrared spectroscopy, so nobody can really do targeted fortification. Some of us do look at serum urea and maybe doing, I guess, a form of adjustable fortification. And so a small number of units will be adding additional protein hydrolysate if the urea is very low. There's massive uncertainty around what we should be doing about metabolic bone disease or deficiency. Many NICUs now more often are starting to monitor parathyroid hormone levels and urinary phosphate excretion. To me, that looks like we're doing a lot of extra blood tests. I'm not quite sure whether that really makes a difference to the babies. All of us give routine vitamin D, normally an extra 400 units, but remember, the fortifiers are often also supplemented with vitamin D. But we have had supply issues getting a vitamin D product, so we always tend to use a multivitamin product. This was a small survey of dietitians. I've included it because there's really not very much other data out there, showing that most start because of very low birth weight. Most stop when the babies are feeding from the breast or going home. But a significant number, not surprisingly, will withhold breast milk fortifier for a whole variety of reasons. Obviously, NEC is there. This was another study conducted a few years back, but in short, it suggested that up to 40% of people think that breast milk fortifier can be implicated in the development of NEC, and almost 20% believe that human-derived rather than bovine-derived fortifiers might be safer. There was also a secondary question about whether using breast milk fortifier routinely decreases breastfeeding at discharge, and the green bars and the right thing suggest that whether you use fortifier routinely or not doesn't adversely impact on breastfeeding success. What do we do post-discharge? You'll know that there've been a couple of trials, but none of them are very big. There's Gita Zachariason's trial from Denmark and Deb O'Connor's trial. Most babies in the UK are not discharged on Fortifier, but a small number of us will use it in very select infants. It's challenging because we can't prescribe it post-discharge. And I think there are valid concerns that it might complicate and actually decrease breastfeeding. And along with Mark Johnson, we did put in a bid to do a study on this, but that was a total failure and they decided not to fund us, disappointingly. There are two commercial bovine products available in the UK. Both are powdered. One contains iron and one does not. So when there are supply issues, people often forget that. These are whey hydrolysates with maltodextrin as the carbohydrate source. There's no fat in them, but additional DHA is being considered. And it would theoretically be possible to access two different human milk fortifiers, one a powdered one from Neocare, and it would be possible to access Prolacta as well, although I think a very tiny number of units only have ever used it. Now, these are the trials that all of you will be aware of looking at human milk diets. And there is the classic kind of Sullivan study that all of you know, and then the Fortifier study, one from Canada, Deb O'Connor, and one from the Swedish group. And so it's really these are the total RCT data on what might be the benefit of human milk derived fortifier. This is the classical Sullivan study, a very important study showing a higher rate of neck when babies are either getting preterm formula or cow milk fortifier compared to human milk derived diet. This is the only large trial to show an important effect of fortifier, but of course these babies were co-randomized to also getting a preterm formula. So it's not really a fortifier study on its own. We repeated this study design from Sullivan in just over 100 babies and published that with a primary outcome looking at the microbiome. I expected to see a big impact on the microbiome, but actually very little impact on the microbiome, which I found very surprising, and no difference in clinical outcomes. This is Deb O'Connor's small study randomizing babies to either a human milk or a cow milk derived fortifier with a primary outcome of feeding interruptions. Really showed no difference at all, no difference in neck, but this interesting lower rate of ROP in the babies with the human milk fortifier. And then this was the larger Swedish study published last year, randomizing babies, all of whom were getting donor human milk for shortfall, to either human milk or cow milk derived fortifier, and no difference in the primary, which was a composite of neck sepsis and mortality, or indeed the individual rate of neck. And we take that to suggest that at this point in time, routine human milk derived fortifier, not only for us is too expensive, but is not strongly supported by the data. We did a small study in our unit using the powdered human milk fortifier from Neocare, randomizing babies to either getting that or a bovine milk derived fortifier with a primary outcome of stool calprotectin. But we saw no difference between the two arms. And interestingly, that trial was stopped early when it appeared that the breast milk fortifier had higher levels of lead than permitted. And there has been an ongoing investigation into the source of that lead contamination. But I think it reminds all of us that using human milk derived products requires very, very stringent safety control. So where is the uncertainty coming from? Well, there is sufficient uncertainty in the UK that many people are planning this trial where babies will be randomized to either getting preterm formula or donor human milk if there's a shortfall. And then there's a second randomization to whether they get routinely fortified or not. And this is on the back of the fact that at least half the babies getting NEC in the UK have only ever had human milk. And there is a real question then as to whether donor milk is as good as people imagine it to be. And all of you in North America will be aware of the ongoing lawsuits around the use of human milk derived products. So this is a very important issue. This is a very brief overview of the planned trial. It's not a 2x2 factorial. There are two separate kind of studies wrapped up in one where babies can either be randomized to what milk you use for shortfall, or they can be randomized to whether they get routine fortification or not. But then you can be in both trials. A very complex trial design, potentially very important, but I think a lot of people are struggling with the equipoise as to whether babies should really be having donor milk or formula as shortfall. I've collaborated with Klaus Klingenberg to do a study of European feeding practices. We did one many years ago in 2010. So we asked a similar set of questions But again, these just show you in bold that, most units are using breast milk fortifier. A very small number of units in Europe or Canada are using human milk derived fortifier. And the North Americans seem to start earliest, whereas in UK, most of us seem to be waiting until babies get to full feeds at 150. So, in summary, we start fortifier less later than you. We're less likely to use it routinely. We're less likely to use a human-derived fortifier than the States. We're a bit more worried about fortifier increasing neck, but we are then just as ignorant and conflicted as you lot are about what we should be doing. There's a real lack of real-world data. There's a lot of uncertainty in equipoise, which makes planning trials very difficult. But we do need larger trials to power for functional outcomes. But then we have the question, what do we actually do in the control arm? How many nutrients? What's the composition of the fortifier and the source? And what outcomes are we going to measure? And are these trials really feasible? So that's where I'm going to finish with this great quote that without data, you're just another person with an opinion. So thank you very much. I hope I've left some time for questions if I get on to be able to join you. But if not, thanks very much again. Thank you.